It was the autumn of 1987 when the Willow Creek Library reopened its doors after being closed for almost a decade. The townspeople had whispered about the building for years, claiming that strange lights flickered from its windows at night, and that the air around it carried the faint smell of old paper and damp earth. When the city finally decided to restore the abandoned building, everyone was surprised to see a grand reopening banner fluttering across its entrance. The mayor claimed it was a step toward preserving history, but some residents remembered the last librarian's mysterious disappearance and didn't show up for the ceremony. The building stood at the far end of Main Street, surrounded by overgrown oak trees whose branches scratched the windows like fingers. The moment you stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights blended with the whisper of turning pages, though no one was near the shelves. The new librarian, Evelyn Crane, a quiet woman in her 30s, had been hired from another state. She seemed unaware of the building's reputation and smiled politely when locals told her ghost stories about it. She only said libraries hold memories. Some are louder than others. On her first day, Evelyn found something unsettling. An entire section of the basement had been sealed off with heavy chains and padlocks. The old blueprints didn't mention any restricted area. The maintenance man, Mr. Holbrook, told her that the previous librarian, Margaret Ellis, used to spend hours down there alone before she disappeared in 1978. No one dared to open it since. Evelyn, curious and pragmatic, decided not to disturb the locks, at least not yet. At dusk, the library became eerily quiet. The floorboards creaked like sighs and the smell of dust grew stronger. She began shelving books near the history section when she heard the unmistakable sound of pages turning, not softly but rapidly, as if someone were angrily flipping through a book. When she turned, the aisle was empty. The air felt charged, and she could swear she heard a faint whisper. "Don't read it." Evelyn brushed it off as her imagination and went to close the blinds. Outside, the street was empty, the fog rolling in from the nearby woods. For a moment, she saw a reflection in the window, not hers, but that of an older woman standing behind her, her mouth moving soundlessly. Evelyn turned, and the space was empty except for the scent of lavender and dust. She locked up early that night, telling herself the building just needed time to settle. That night, as rain began to fall, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the whisper, the reflection, and the sealed basement door. Something about it gnawed at her like an unfinished sentence. She remembered one detail Mr. Holbrook had mentioned. Margaret Ellis's last recorded entry in the logbook simply read, "The book has found its voice." The next morning, Evelyn returned before dawn. She wanted to prove to herself there was nothing supernatural about the place. But as she walked in, she noticed something new. A single book sitting on the main desk. Its leather cover was cracked and ancient with no visible title. She was sure it hadn't been there yesterday. When she opened it, all the pages were blank except one, a single line written in faded ink. "To read is to awaken what sleeps beneath." Evelyn felt a chill crawl up her spine. The ink shimmered faintly as if still wet. She closed the book, locked it in her drawer, and forced herself to start the day as usual. But she didn't notice that behind her, in the reflection of the glass cabinet, the book's cover slowly began to shift, and a faint outline of a face began pressing against the inside of the leather, as if something wanted out. By noon, the townspeople began to visit, smiling and grateful to have the library back. None of them noticed how cold it was inside, or how every clock in the building had stopped at 9:13, the exact minute Margaret Ellis disappeared 9 years earlier. Evelyn smiled at the visitors, her voice steady, but deep inside she could feel something stirring beneath her feet, something that had waited a very long time for someone to open the wrong book. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. The Willow Creek Library had become the new talk of town. School children giggled between aisles, and old residents lingered around the newspaper archives, pretending not to look nervous. Evelyn kept her professional smile, but every night when she closed the door, the silence pressed against her ears like water. She began to notice that no matter how neatly she arranged the books, one section, the folklore and local history shelf, always seemed disturbed by mourning. Volumes would be left open on tables, pages creased, sometimes damp, as if someone had been reading them with wet hands. On the fourth morning, Evelyn found another note she didn't remember writing in the staff log. It was written in her handwriting, but with words she would never use. The words are changing. They remember. She stared at it for minutes, tracing the ink with her finger, trying to recall if she had sleepwalked or forgotten something. The thought frightened her more than she wanted to admit. She turned toward her drawer, the same drawer where she had locked the strange leather book, only to find it slightly open. The key was still in her pocket. Inside, the book lay open now, its pages fluttering though the windows were closed. The single line she had read before had spread, like a stain, forming new words. They were faint but readable. She tried to silence us. "You won't!" Evelyn slammed it shut, heart pounding. Her instinct screamed at her to burn it, to throw it out, to pretend she had never seen it. But curiosity, that dangerous, persistent trait of librarians, whispered louder. She placed the book back inside, locked the drawer, and stepped away. That evening, while cataloging an old donation from the university, she found a folder labeled Margaret Ellis, Personal Research. It had been misfiled in the children's section. Inside were handwritten pages, maps, and a series of library floor plans marked with red X's. One note stood out: "The basement door must remain sealed. The archive listens. When the wrong name is spoken, it writes back." The handwriting trembled in the last few lines, as though written in panic. Evelyn's breath quickened. She realized Margaret hadn't simply disappeared. She'd been trying to stop something. The power flickered as the rain returned outside. Evelyn decided to close early, but as she reached for her coat, she heard the unmistakable sound of whispering. Dozens of voices overlapping, low and rhythmic, coming from the history section. They weren't human voices, not exactly. They carried an echo like sound traveling through water. Against her better judgment, Evelyn followed the sound down the dim aisle, the beam of her flashlight trembling over the spines of dusty books. The whispers grew louder, clearer, forming words she could almost understand. Then suddenly, silence, complete and suffocating. The air was thick, the smell of mildew sharp. Evelyn's flashlight flickered and died. In the brief dark, she heard the faint thud of a book falling from the shelf. She crouched to find it. It was the same leather-bound book, its cover damp, the pages slightly open as if it had been breathing. A voice, gentle but urgent, filled her mind. "Don't leave me unread!" Evelyn stumbled back, her heart pounding against her ribs. She dropped the book and ran for the main lights. When they flickered on, everything was normal again. The aisles empty, the book gone. Trembling, she looked toward her desk, and there it was, neatly placed, as though it had never moved. Only now the title had appeared on its cover in gold lettering she hadn't seen before. The Record of the Forgotten. That night, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, staring at the rain outside her window. Her mind wrestled between reason and fear. Maybe the book was an elaborate prank. Maybe someone in town wanted to scare her. But deep down, she knew the book wasn't ordinary. It had weight, presence, intent. She thought of Margaret's final note, of the words, "When the wrong name is spoken, it writes back." Evelyn didn't know yet what that meant. But as she drifted into restless sleep, she dreamed of a woman standing in the library basement, surrounded by whispering pages, whispering her own name again and again until the walls began to bleed ink. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at the library to find muddy footprints leading from the entrance to the basement door, her own size, her own tread pattern. Yet she had been home all night. The morning sunlight barely touched the windows of Willow Creek Library. Clouds hung low, turning the glass into gray mirrors. Evelyn arrived before anyone else, still shaken by the footprints she had found the previous day. They were gone now, scrubbed away overnight, though she hadn't cleaned them. The janitor, Mr. Holbrook, swore he hadn't either. "Maybe you imagined them," he muttered nervously, avoiding her eyes. But Evelyn knew what she had seen. Her shoes still held a trace of the same mud that had led to the basement door. She hadn't walked there, yet somehow she had. All morning she worked distractedly, returning books to their shelves while the words of Margaret Ellis's note echoed in her head. The archive listens. The phrase gnawed at her, pulling her attention toward the locked basement. It was absurd to think a room could listen, and yet she had felt it. The air in the library seemed heavier near the floorboards above that door, as if sound didn't travel right. Whispers, faint and distant, sometimes rose through the cracks, too soft to make out, but rhythmic, like breathing. By noon, Evelyn gave in to her curiosity. She fetched the keys from the maintenance room, her hands trembling as she approached the basement entrance. The chain was rusted and the padlock old but intact. She hesitated for a long time before inserting the key. A thought crossed her mind, that Margaret must have stood in this same place, hearing the same sounds before she vanished. The key turned with a stiff click. The chain fell loose. A gust of cold air rolled out from the gap, carrying the scent of mold, ink, and something metallic, like blood left too long to dry. The staircase descended into darkness, the light bulbs along the wall long dead. Evelyn switched on her flashlight and stepped down carefully. Dust fell like ash with every movement. Halfway down, she noticed that the walls were lined with bookshelves, not wooden, but carved directly into the concrete, filled with volumes that looked impossibly old. None of them had titles. Their spines were pale, as if bleached by time, and the air buzzed faintly, as though the books themselves were humming. At the bottom of the stairs, the floor opened into a wide chamber lit faintly by candles, new ones. Someone had been here recently. In the center of the room sat a large table covered in parchment, maps, and open journals. Evelyn recognized Margaret Ellis's handwriting instantly. Pages were filled with frantic notes, arrows, and sketches of a circular symbol, a ring of open eyes surrounding a book. Beneath the drawing, one line repeated over and over. They learn through the reader. Evelyn's breath caught as she saw her own name written below in newer ink. Evelyn Crane, the next keeper. A soft rustling came from behind her. She turned the flashlight, catching a glimpse of movement, pages fluttering though there was no wind. One of the books on the shelf opened by itself. Its pages flipped wildly until they stopped on a single phrase, written in fresh ink. "Welcome back, Margaret." Evelyn froze. Her heart skipped. Then, slowly, the words began to bleed, reshaping themselves into something else. "Welcome home, Evelyn." The temperature dropped sharply. Her breath fogged. The candles flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. The room seemed to tighten around her as if the walls leaned closer. She wanted to run, but her legs refused. She felt something brush against her ankle, a sound like paper sliding against skin. Looking down, she saw scraps of parchment slithering across the floor, curling toward her feet like hungry tongues. Evelyn backed away and bumped into the table. Margaret's final journal fell open, revealing an entry dated October 13, 1978, the night she vanished. The ink was smeared, but the last paragraph was still legible. The book feeds on names. It writes the reader into itself. I can hear it calling mine. If anyone finds this, don't answer when it asks who you are. Evelyn's hand trembled as she turned the page. There, written in fresh, wet ink, were 3 new words. Who are you? Her flashlight flickered again. The whispering rose all around, thousands of overlapping voices repeating the same question, insistent, desperate. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? The pressure built in her ears until she screamed, clutching her head. I'm Evelyn, she shouted before she could stop herself. The voices went silent. Then, softly, like the rustle of turning pages, the whispers answered in unison, Now you belong here. The candles went out. When Evelyn stumbled out of the basement hours later, dawn had begun to break. Her clothes were dusty, her skin pale, her eyes hollow. In her hands, she still carried the leather-bound book, but now, her name was embossed across the cover in fading gold. When Evelyn awoke, she was lying on the library's main floor beneath the long oak table, her head throbbing. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, catching the floating dust in gold shafts. For a moment, she couldn't remember how she had gotten there. The last thing she recalled was the whispering, the question, and her own terrified voice answering it. Her mouth was dry, her fingers stained with black ink that wouldn't rub away. The old leather book rested near her, its cover slightly warm to the touch, her name still etched across it like a curse. The air in the library had changed. It was quieter than usual, too still. The clock on the wall had stopped again, this time at 6:44. She sat up slowly, every sound amplified, the creak of her shoes, the rustle of paper. She thought she was alone until she heard movement in the next aisle, the soft slide of a book being removed from a shelf. "Mr. Holbrook?" she called, her voice trembling. No reply. She turned the corner and froze. A book hovered in the air before her, pages turning on their own as if invisible hands were reading it. Then it dropped, slamming shut with a sharp echo. Evelyn backed away, pulse racing. The book on the floor wasn't one from the library's collection. It was an old logbook, the librarian's record. She flipped it open and felt her stomach twist. The most recent entries were written in her own handwriting, though she had never penned them. Each line recorded a name, a date, and a note that read, "Returned." The names were unfamiliar, dozens of them, except the last one. Margaret Ellis, returned 10/23/1987. The ink shimmered faintly, as if still drying. She stumbled toward her desk, searching for something to make sense of what was happening. That's when she noticed the framed photograph on the wall, the one showing all previous librarians of Willow Creek Library. It had always hung behind the counter, but now there was a new face added at the end of the row, hers. The frame looked freshly dusted, her portrait smiling slightly too wide, eyes dark and distant. Beneath it, a brass nameplate had appeared. Evelyn Crane, 1987. The dash hung open, waiting to be finished. Panic clawed at her throat. She grabbed the photograph and threw it to the floor, glass shattering across the tiles. The sound echoed through the building, followed by the faint shuffle of footsteps upstairs in the reading hall. She turned, clutching her flashlight, and called out again. "Who's there?" Her voice broke. For a moment, there was silence, then the unmistakable sound of a chair sliding across the floor above her. Someone was up there. Evelyn climbed the stairs, her heart hammering. The upper floor was bathed in gray light. Rows of desks stood empty except for one near the far window, where a figure sat facing away from her. A woman, hair gray and thin, dressed in the faded uniform of a librarian. "Hello?" Evelyn whispered. The woman didn't move. "Are you—" Evelyn stopped mid-sentence as the figure slowly turned her head. It was Margaret Ellis. Her eyes were blank white, her lips cracked, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like dry paper tearing. "You shouldn't have answered." Evelyn stumbled back, nearly tripping over a chair. Margaret stood, her movements stiff, unnatural. "I tried to seal it," she rasped, her words overlapping faintly as though another voice echoed beneath her own. "It remembers every name. It waits for the curious." Her hand lifted, pointing toward Evelyn's pocket. The leather book pulsed there, faintly glowing. "Now it knows you." "I don't understand," Evelyn cried. "What is it? What does it want?" Margaret's expression twisted into something that wasn't quite human, part grief, part warning. "The library doesn't store books," she said softly. "It stores souls. Each one who reads the record feeds it, gives it another name, another memory. We are not its keepers. We are its words." Her voice faltered as ink began to drip from the corners of her eyes. "You have to leave before it finishes writing you." The sound of pages began to fill the room again, louder this time, like a storm of paper. Books flew from the shelves, circling the two women. Evelyn covered her head as the noise built into a deafening roar. When she looked up again, Margaret was gone. Only the faint scent of lavender and dust remained. The books crashed to the floor one by one, the last falling open at Evelyn's feet. It showed her own photograph printed across a page, her eyes just as blank as Margaret's. Beneath it, a single line appeared, written in slow, deliberate strokes. "Returned 10 25, 1987. Evelyn screamed and tore the page out, but another grew in its place instantly, the same words repeating, darker each time. She dropped the book and ran for the front door. The handle wouldn't budge. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, erasing the town beyond. The library was closing in around her. The fog outside the windows thickened until the world beyond vanished entirely. Evelyn pressed her palms to the glass, her reflection staring back at her, pale, shaking, eyes too wide. Behind her reflection, for a brief, horrifying moment, she saw Margaret standing again, smiling faintly before fading like smoke. The library felt alive now, breathing through its walls. Every creak sounded like a sigh, every whisper like her own name being spoken from between the shelves. She turned toward the main hall, and there, scattered across the floor, lay open books, hundreds of them, their pages turning themselves as if guided by unseen hands. Each book whispered softly. Different tones, different pitches, all overlapping into an unbearable murmur. Evelyn stepped closer, her mind spinning. The words on the pages shifted as she looked at them, rearranging letters to form sentences that weren't supposed to exist. The keeper is chosen. The name is known. The story continues. She backed away, heart pounding, clutching her flashlight like a weapon. The leather-bound volume, the record of the forgotten, still pulsed in her coat pocket like a second heartbeat. She needed to destroy it. That was all she could think. Destroy the book, and whatever this was. Evelyn raced toward the librarian's office, grabbed a metal waste bin, and dumped in crumpled paper and old receipts. She struck a match from a box on the shelf, her hands trembling. The flame caught small and desperate, its light flickering across her face. She pulled out the record and hesitated only a second before tossing it into the fire. For a moment, the leather smoked. Then the flame went out, cold, completely extinguished. The air grew even colder. From inside the bin came a sound, faint but unmistakable, the slow turning of a page. Evelyn's stomach lurched. She stepped back as black ink began to seep out of the book, flowing upward like smoke, but thicker, heavier. It drifted toward the ceiling and then began to spread across it, forming shapes, faces, countless faces, all murmuring in hollow unison. "We were stories once," they whispered. "Now we are remembered." Evelyn ran for the door again, but this time the floor shifted beneath her feet. The tiles rippled like liquid paper. Words began to appear across them, sentences written in her own handwriting. She tried to run. She could not leave her own story. The realization hit her. The library wasn't just alive. It was rewriting reality. Everything she did, everything she said, was being transcribed somewhere in its endless archive. Panicked, she fled toward the basement stairs, the only place she hadn't yet escaped from. The door hung open, the darkness below breathing faintly. As she descended, the sound of whispering pages followed her. The basement looked different now. Larger, endless rows of shelves, stretching far beyond where the walls should have been. Each shelf held thousands of books, each spine bearing a name. She reached out and traced one, Thomas Reed. Another, Lila Monroe. Each one pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat under leather. These weren't books. They were people. Then she found one that made her freeze. Margaret Ellis. She opened it slowly, her breath shallow. The pages were filled with memories, Margaret's memories. Notes, moments, dreams, even her last terrified thoughts before disappearing. The final line read, "If you open this, I am gone. But I will help you if I can." The ink shimmered and suddenly the air shifted. Margaret's voice filled the chamber, soft and distant. "Evelyn, there is a way out. Every book has an ending. You must write yours before it writes you." Evelyn spun, searching for the voice, but she was alone. The ink that had stained her hands began to glow faintly. A realization struck her. The library wrote through her. If she could write faster than it did, maybe she could end the story. She grabbed a pen and blank notebook from the desk nearby, her hands trembling, and began to write. Evelyn Crane closed the book and the voices fell silent. The air thickened. The whispering rose, furious now, as if the library itself resisted her words. Books flew from shelves, slamming shut, cracking their spines. "You are ours," the voices cried. Evelyn kept writing, tears streaking down her face. The record burned. The door opened. She was free. The ink bled through the page, spreading like veins. The ground trembled. Suddenly, a blinding white light filled the room. The books screamed, not voices, but the raw sound of thousands of pages tearing at once. Evelyn dropped the notebook, covering her ears. When she opened her eyes again, the shelves were gone. The room was empty, silent. Only the single book, the record of the forgotten, remained on the floor, closed, smoking gently. Its cover was blank again, no title. No name. Evelyn exhaled shakily, the first breath of stillness she'd felt in days. She climbed the stairs and stepped into daylight. The fog had lifted. The town outside looked normal. The air smelled clean. The library stood quiet, its windows glinting peacefully. But when she reached for the door to leave, she froze. A new plaque hung beside it, brass shining, freshly engraved. It read, "Willow Creek Public Library Head Librarian, Evelyn Crane, 1987. The dash, once again, was open, waiting. For the next several days, Willow Creek seemed normal again, right, at least on the surface. The fog was gone, the birds returned, and the library stood quietly at the end of Main Street as if nothing had ever happened. But Evelyn could feel it. The air still carried that strange heaviness, like static just before a storm. Every time she passed the plaque with her name on it, she felt her heart skip. The dash at the end still gleamed unfinished. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself that what had happened in the basement was just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. Yet deep down, she knew the truth. She hadn't destroyed the book. She had only paused it. On the fourth morning after the incident, Evelyn noticed something strange. The mailman, a friendly man named Robert who delivered letters to the library for years, stood by the counter with a confused look on his face. "You know, Miss Crane," he said slowly, "I was just talking to a woman about this place yesterday. What was her name?" He frowned, tapping his temple. "Funny, I can't remember. She said she used to work here before you, but..." His voice trailed off, his face pale. "Isn't that odd?" Evelyn's stomach turned cold. He was forgetting Margaret. By afternoon, it wasn't just Robert. 2 teenage girls came in asking where the new library had come from. They swore it hadn't been here last month. Evelyn smiled weakly, saying it had always been here, but their puzzled expressions told her otherwise. Something was happening to the town, something the book had started. The more people forgot, the quieter the world felt. Even the sound of cars outside seemed muffled, as though reality itself was thinning. That night, unable to sleep, Evelyn sat at her desk under the pale glow of her desk lamp. She pulled open the drawer she swore she'd locked, and there it was again. The record of the forgotten. The cover was blank, but when she touched it, the surface rippled slightly like the skin of water. The book hadn't just survived, it had returned to her. She opened it slowly, breath held. The first page bore new writing. The story continues where it must. "The town will fade as she remembers." Evelyn slammed it shut, trembling. If the town was forgetting, and she was remembering, then she was feeding it, keeping it alive. The library didn't just store names. It consumed memory to preserve itself. Every forgotten person became another page in its endless collection. Desperate, she turned to the old journals Margaret had left behind. There, she found one final, unfinished note. "The only way to stop the record is to erase the librarian, the keeper of the name. If she is unwritten, the stories sleep again. Erase the librarian." The words echoed in her head like a curse. Was that what had happened to Margaret? Had she erased herself to seal the library? If so, then Evelyn was now trapped in the same cycle. She looked at her reflection in the dark window, her face pale, tired, and faintly distorted, as if the glass were trying to forget her too. Outside, the streetlights flickered, dimming one by one. The next morning, Willow Creek was quieter than ever. The coffee shop across from the library was closed. The bakery's sign had vanished entirely, leaving only a faint outline of letters. When Evelyn greeted a man walking by, he only blinked in confusion and asked, "Do you work here, miss? I didn't know we had a library." The words hit her like a physical blow. He didn't know who she was. By evening, the silence was unbearable. Evelyn stood at the library entrance, staring at the shelves lined with books that seemed to breathe softly in the dim light. She walked down the aisles, running her fingers along the spines. "If I'm the keeper," she whispered, "then I end it." She went to the desk, opened the record, and dipped her pen into ink. The page stared back at her, waiting. Her hand shook as she wrote the words, "Evelyn Crane never existed." The ink bled instantly, spreading like veins across the page. The walls shuddered, lights flickering. From deep within the library, the whispering began again, not angry this time, but mournful, hundreds of voices sighing as one. The shelves trembled. Books fell open, blanking out their words, their names fading like breath on glass. Evelyn felt her body growing cold, her reflection blurring in the window. She wrote faster, desperate now. The town remembered itself. The fog lifted. The library slept. The final line glowed faintly, and then, for the first time in weeks, silence filled the room. Evelyn dropped the pen, gasping. The air was still. The building no longer pulsed beneath her feet. The book was dark and lifeless. For a moment, she thought it had worked. She walked to the door, turned the handle, and it opened easily. Outside, the town was bright again. Children laughed, cars passed by, and people walked the streets as though nothing strange had ever happened. But when a little girl passing by looked up at her and asked, "Miss, what's this building?" Evelyn froze. She looked up. The sign above the door didn't say Willow Creek Public Library. It said for lease. The building was empty. No shelves, no books, no history. And when she turned to ask the girl another question, the child was gone. She looked down at her reflection in the glass door, and there was nothing there. The sky over Millstone was never truly dark anymore. Since the night of the fire, the streetlights seemed to burn endlessly, and no one dared to step outside once the sun went down. The old library had been sealed off with yellow police tape and warning signs, but no one was brave enough to go inside for an investigation. Everyone in town knew something darker still lingered in there, something that didn't want to be found again. Martha No lived in. Martha now lived in a psychiatric ward outside the city. She no longer spoke the way she used to. Whenever the nurses came near her, she would stare into the corner of her room and whisper softly, "They're still reading. They never stop reading." Sometimes at night, the guards heard footsteps in the hallway outside her room, even though every patient was asleep. When they checked on her, Martha would be sitting in the dark, clutching a torn piece of paper from a book no one could identify. 2 months after the incident, construction workers found Nathaniel, the missing librarian, trapped beneath the collapsed basement of the library. His body was completely dry, as if time had forgotten him, and on his face was a peaceful smile, like someone who had just finished the final page of a beautiful story. In his hands was an old book covered in dust, the same one Martha had seen that night. But when they opened it, every single page was blank. After that day, strange things began happening across Millstone. People swore they heard something at night. Not crying, not screaming, but a soft voice reading aloud from somewhere far away. Sometimes it came from the ruins of the library. Other times it came from inside their own homes. One resident recorded the sound, and when he played it back, he could clearly hear a voice whispering the names of the townspeople, one by one, including his own. Teams of archaeologists and paranormal investigators came, hoping to explain what had happened. But every piece of equipment failed the moment they entered the archives. Cameras froze, microphones went silent, and even flashlight beams seemed to vanish into the air. One researcher fainted at the entrance and later described seeing rows of people sitting at a long table, reading endlessly, their eyes completely black. Years later, the government finally demolished the library. But the night it was torn down, the air grew bitterly cold. From the ground where the foundation once stood, people heard the same faint sound, the whisper of pages turning by unseen hands. When the debris was cleared, workers found one thing that couldn't be destroyed, a bronze plaque reading, "The Millstone Public Library, founded 1893. On the back, faintly carved, were 3 chilling words, "Words never die." Today, a small city park stands where the library once was. Children play near the fountain in the daylight, but their parents always call them home before dark. Sometimes people claim to see a figure sitting alone on a bench, a man dressed like an old librarian, reading a dusty book that never ends. And if anyone dares to come close, he gently closes the book and says in a calm voice, "It's your turn to read now." Many believe it's nothing more than a local legend, a ghost story meant to frighten kids. But every year, on the same night the fire consumed the library, something impossible happens. All the clocks in Millstone stop ticking at exactly 12:03 a.m. Watin, the moment the flames first broke out in the basement. And in that brief silence, if you listen carefully, you can hear the whisper again, softly speaking a single name. That name is always the one belonging to whoever just finished reading this story.